of this video is a cultist captain, Frostgrave cultist captain. Mrs. Panzerschüler is currently painting the other figure that comes with the set. A little word on assembly, they're both got quite a bit of assembly to do. This guy's got an arm with an axe, it's got to tuck in neatly into the back of the hood. And then it's got this arm and the fur cloak as a single piece. So there's quite a bit of gluing to be done, a bit of patience to be shown, folks. I used Araldite in getting this together, so it does take a bit of sort of clever gluing and patience and blue tack and everything to hold things in place, but it's worth doing. So I'm going to be starting with the cloak. I'll move over to a recorded narration, but just a quick comment on this. You know, like, even though I'm dreading it, I'm going to go with some kind of white fur, like, you know, polar bear or some variation, you know, maybe with stripes or so on. The thought of painting more white fills me with dread, but I think I've got to do it. The rest of the figure is going to be quite dark, and it'll give a really, really nice, bright, sort of like brightness to set off the darkness. You know, imagine that figure will be sitting framed by a nice, bright background. So, let's get started. The entire figure's been given an undercoat of German camel black brown, but for the fur cape, I want to have a sort of blue-white kind of colour, something suitably Arctic in nature, cold climate, shall we say. So I'm giving it an undercoat of ultramarine, and I'm just applying that all over. It doesn't have to be a hugely perfect undercoat. And then I'm giving it a coat of azure, building up the layers of blue towards a whiter colour, and you can see I'm leaving just a little bit of the ultramarine in recessed areas where I want to create a little bit of shape. It's not a particularly detailed task at the moment. And I also have to get in behind the figure, which is a bit awkward with this figure because of the construction, but I'm doing that just now so that any mistakes can be corrected with a little bit of German camel black brown. Now I'm adding some off-white, and I'm kind of just feeling my way through this. I don't want it to just be bluey white, so I'll be adding some kind of pattern, some kind of animal skin type pattern to it. But as I said, I'm just feeling my way through without any particular plan, but just building up the colours towards what will ultimately be white as a final highlight colour. Now I can do a bit of a touch up, also touching up the talons that are kind of holding the fur coat in place, and then you can see where I've got some paint on the hand and so on. It's very easy to fix it at this point, a lot harder if it was already painted. So you always tend to try and paint the most awkward to reach areas first. Now I've gone back to the German camel black brown undercoat here, or undercoat, and I'm creating some shapes here. I don't really, as I said, have a plan for what I'm doing. I'm just kind of imagining some sort of pattern coming off what would be the spine of whatever creature this used to be. And I'll just keep building up the shape till I'm happy with the size and the curve of those sort of rib-like shapes. So then I'm going in with, this is US Field Drab, and this is effectively the shade colour now for this main colour. There will still be quite a bit of the German Camo black brown left because it's got a lot of recesses. It's not a flat area, so I'm quite happy to leave a lot of the black brown visible. And hopefully this is going to be a nice contrast against the white and still be a fairly believable kind of pattern. And then I'm going in with a smaller brush here, and I am using Panzer Aces Old Wood. So the smaller brush is putting on a smaller amount of paint, getting a little bit more control to start defining the shape. And then I'm going in with some white now. Now we know where that shade, the animal pattern is going to be. I'm going in with some white and pick out all the high spots just to give it a little bit more depth and a little bit of a white shine to it. Now the face and the skin, the eyes were a bit of a nightmare on this guy, folks, because they're recessed quite deep into the executioner's hood there, so a lot of care was needed, a lot of fixing was needed. So once again, painting the eyes, the recessed areas first, sorry, is a good idea. Now I'm actually using a rust colour here for the first coat on the skin. It's Panzer Aces Light Rust. It's a good sort of reddish skin tone. This is going to become the shade colour, but I am leaving a little bit of the undercoat visible. And then the main colour is Heavy Ochre, which is a yellowish, dark kind of yellowish kind of colour. Oh, that's game colour, yellow ochre. And I'm being careful to leave the rust, light rust, as a shade. And when you're painting a torso like that, just be mindful of the anatomy of the torso. Follow that and you really can't go too far wrong, as long as your paint's going on nice and controlled and a nice consistency, so it's going to stay where you put it. And painting well defined torsos and arms like this is it's a good thing to do with this technique, because you can really control the shape, and as you'll see with the highlights, really define the little sort of sinews in the muscle and such likes. Now I'm using Flat Flesh for the highlight. Now that's a very, very bright highlight. It looks a lot brighter here than it does to the naked eye, but I'm putting it on in very controlled amounts, tiny little lines. And remember folks, when you're using a small brush with a small amount of paint, it will dry really quick, so you've got to keep refreshing it. The paint has to flow off the brush and not drag off the brush to get these tiny little lines. And that's an army paint, an Insane Detail that's been worn down to about 4 hairs, but any Insane Detail brush will work fine. You can see they've done the eyes there, and I'm trying to get a bit of highlight around them. Now the Executioner's hood, I could have gone for something dark, but I decided to go for red. So it's base colour, burnt cadmium red, then main colour is red with a highlight of scarlet, though in the end I did use some bright orange as well later on in the process. So I'm leaving a little bit of the undercoat, especially around the eyes, just trying to create a little bit of shape, and then creating more shade when I'm putting the main coat on. You can see painting little lines, little blobs, finding out where the shape is, and then I will join those little lines and blobs up, hitting the edges. And remember folks, you'll need 2 coats for just about everything that you're painting, except for the really small areas, so be patient. If you take the approach of creating the lines and the blobs and such likes as your first coat, and then go in with the second coat and join everything up, you'll have opaque and semi-opaque areas as a result, and that provides quite a nice bit of transition. So there's me just applying another coat, but not putting it over the entire surface of the first coat. And then here's the scarlet going on. As you can see, it's not the starkest of highlights, and that's why I ended up using the bright orange, tiny amounts though, once again. And here I am catching edges, catching where the shade is, putting a highlight line between the shade and the main colour. That helps to really give it a bit of depth. Now the gloves, they are being painted with leather brown and a main coat. In this case the Gemmy Camel Black Brown can act as a shade, so it's leather brown and then game colour Beastie Brown, and in the end I came back and gave it a little bit of a highlight of orange brown for a bit of a leathery, worn leathery edge. Now there I'm just following the shape, taking a couple of coats, taking my time, getting the paint on in a way it's going to stay where I want it to go but flow nice and smooth. And there's the highlight going on now. As I said, because it's got a brown undercoat, that can act as your shade colour. I've given this guy a nice bright fur coat, quite a bright skin and a bright executioner suit, so it's time to just darken things down a bit now. Get him looking a bit menacing. Now the shaft on the axe, that is US Field Drab as a shade colour, Panzer Aces Old Wood, and then Iraqi Sand as a final little highlight colour. Once again, a couple of coats will be needed. Here I'm removing most of the undercoat in terms of what's visible. The US Field Drab will be the shade. Where the end of the axe shaft is all splintered, I can leave some of the deep shade in there, some of the undercoat. So I'm starting to add the old wood, Panzer Aces Old Wood, and I'm leaving little lines of the undercoat to try and build up the look of wood grain. And this will take a couple of coats as well, so you've got to be careful you go back over the same lines each time. Just trying to create a sort of a look of an open-ended bit of wood grain there. And then very careful, once again, thin lines going in with Iraqi Sand, highlighting those areas at the bottom of the shaft there, and then also finding the wood grain that I have painted on, i.e. the shade and the base colour, basically highlighting where they meet each other. And then a few dots around the top there. And then just some bright colours here. I think I may have used Splinter Camo base from Panzer Aces for this, and a bit of deck tan, but anything claw-like in colour will do a trick there. And you see I actually made a bit of a mistake there, but it's very easily fixed with a bit of German Camel Black Brown. So you just go in and redefine the area that has had a bit of a spill. Then a little bit of a highlight going on, helping these little details just catch the eye. Now the trousers I've gone for leather brown with beastie brown again, but this time I didn't end up with a orange brown highlight. I went for US Field Drab as a highlight colour. There's quite a lot of the undercoat going to be left on this, so it's effectively 4 layers when I'm taking this approach with the trousers. You've got your undercoat, leather brown, beastie brown, USA Field Drab, but that last coat is just a tiny little highlight just where it was needed to just get a bit of detail to pop. And there you go, you can see it's just a little bit of a bright edge, and once again that can help frame the mid colour and the shade colour and give it that bit of depth. There's the orange brown going on the gloves at this point. You know, the final highlight colour, you can start with the same base colours and the final highlight colour will make the surface you've just painted, the two surfaces, look really quite different. Now the apron, I think it's an apron, I'm not sure. Keep all the blood off his trousers perhaps when he's cutting people's heads off. But that has had an undercoat of black, and then the shade coat which will replace most of that black. The black's really there for the deepest areas and also just to frame the grey, because grey against dark brown doesn't look right. But the undercoat, sorry, the shade colour there is German camel, German grey, and then the main colour is dark grey with a highlight of London grey. See, once again, just finding lines, finding shapes, working my way up, and then filling in, leaving the shade that I feel looks the best. And sometimes it's the shade that's already there, but sometimes you may have painted in a little shade line yourself that just helps give a bit more depth, or a bit more, it just makes it look a bit busier. And there's a London grey highlight going on. Catching the top edges, outside edges. And as you can see, it just really helps that basic, very dark area pop, catch the eye. And then the bottle, it's got a big long neck bottle there. I've given it a black undercoat and then just used ultramarine and azure again. Now the belt is German camel medium brown, and I've used that on the bottle too for the straps on the bottle. The straps I've highlighted with US Field Drab, and the belt I've highlighted with orange brown. And as you can see, these are quite quick processes. You've not got a lot of waiting time, drying time. You can just move from one colour to the next, to the next, to the next, especially when you're painting small areas. And there's a wee cork in the bottle. So the pouch that's getting painted there is got an undercoat of Track Primer, then main colour of green grey with a highlight of Panzer Ace's Splinter Camel base. You don't need to put that undercoat on for such a small, or the shade coat, rather the track primer, for such a small area, but you can do. Now the cross is a shade colour of Japanese uniform and the main colour of green ochre with a highlight of Iraqi sand. And using a small brush here and just carefully applying smaller and smaller areas of paint just to get it to be nice and bright. The boots are flat earth highlighted with, guess what folks, can you guess what? It's US Field Drab. So we're keeping things nice and dark down here, but it's framed nicely against the lighter fur coat that it's got. And the belt is English uniform, highlighted with old wood. The undercoat colour is a sufficient brown, an appropriate brown to use as a shade colour on this. So you can see it's just dot 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 dot. Really quite simple, and then the highlight is the same principle. Oh, I've just gone for one more highlight on this, folks. Now I'm painting the metallic areas. Everything that's going to be metallic I've given an undercoat of black, because once again sort of greys and such like do not sit well against a shade of dark brown. It's got to be something much darker. So I'm using basalt grey and then giving it a highlight of London grey. But I'm trying to create a very simple non-metallic metal finish. So when I work in this larger area, you'll notice that I'm putting it on really quite wet because I want semi-opaque finishes here, so I can start shaping the final look. Sorry, that's a bit out of shot, folks, but you can see the paint's nice and wet. And then I'm going back over it, and you can see how it's getting a bit of sort of bit of shape and internal shape, you know, a bit of striations, perhaps, you know, just a bit of shininess and reflection. And the little belt buckle is following the same process as well. So we're going in with London grey now, giving it a bit of a highlight. You see I'm making this quite stripy, once again quite wet, so you get semi-opaque edges to the paint as it's drying, following the lines and shapes that I created earlier. And then just try toughen up certain areas by putting quite wet paint on and giving it a bit of a blend, nothing complex. And then we've got Deck Tan as a highlight colour. So I'm just very carefully bouncing that along edges. I'm not highlighting entire edges, just sort of making it a broken kind of line. Just freshening the brush up a bit. And then these are like little points of light basically. We're not trying to create a specific set of reflections, but just a general look. And then using Azure, I'm doing a glaze, very careful, very light glaze. You can also do it in areas you want to be a bit darker. You can use like ultramarine or similar kind of colour and just put a glaze over that part. But as it is, I've just gone for the one colour here, just highlighting those little buttons, sorry. So we've got a metallic look without metallic paint, which is usually more attractive. There's another glaze going on top. Give it a bit of time to dry in between. And there you go folks, we're nearly done.